It was one of those autumn afternoons in Harbor Glen where the world seemed to slow down. The trees whispered in gold, the wind danced through the leaves, and the sidewalks wore a blanket of rust-colored quiet. At just 10 years old, Emily Larson knew the rhythm of this small town better than most adults. She liked how nothing ever changed. Same park, same path, same quiet peace. Until the day it didn't. As usual, Emily walked through Alder Park with Max, her retired German Shepherd. Max wasn't just any dog. He'd once served in military search and rescue units overseas. Now he was older, a little slower but still sharp, still listening in ways no human could. The townsfolk often joked that Max had a sixth sense. And they weren't wrong. They had just passed the old wooden bridge when Max suddenly stopped. No bark, no growl, just stillness. His ears perked, body alert. Emily followed his gaze and saw a boy, maybe her age, walking beside a tall man in a dark gray coat. And first, it looked ordinary, just a father and son, but something was off. The boy's steps were too quiet. His eyes flicked sideways, and then he raised 3 fingers behind his back, palm inward, a small, strange signal. Max let out a short, urgent bark, not loud, just enough to say, "I saw that." Emily stared. She didn't understand the signal. She didn't know why Max reacted that way. But something shifted in the air. Something felt wrong. And even though the boy and the man kept walking, disappearing into the trees, Emily couldn't look away. That moment settled inside her like a stone dropped in still water. She didn't know it yet, but something had just begun. That night, Emily couldn't stop thinking about it. The boy's eyes, the signal, the way Max had barked, low, urgent, like it meant something only he understood. She had never heard him sound like that before, not once. Max was calm, even when squirrels taunted him or thunder cracked the sky. But today, something had changed. At dinner, she told her dad what happened. He listened without interrupting, just nodding as he wiped grease from his hands. "Max did that?" he asked, his voice serious now. Emily nodded. "Sweetheart, Max spent years in the military. He was trained to detect things, danger, fear, even distress. If he reacted like that, it means something." She looked at him. "But I didn't do anything. I didn't understand. What if that boy was asking for help and I just walked away?" Her father sighed, pulled her into a hug. "You saw something strange and you trusted Max. That's already more than most would do." But when the lights went out and the world grew quiet, the thoughts got louder. Emily lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The boy's face wouldn't leave her. That hand signal, 3 fingers, palm inward, kept replaying in her mind. She rolled over, grabbed her tablet, and typed, 3 fingers behind back, meaning. Her breath caught. There it was, the silent distress signal. Taught in schools, in awareness programs, for kids who couldn't speak up. A way to say, "I need help," without a sound. Her heart pounded. She sat upright. He was asking me, asking Max, or maybe asking everyone, and we were the only ones who heard. Emily looked at Max, sleeping near her door. He hadn't moved, but somehow she knew he was listening, and now, so was she. The next morning, Emily woke up with a decision already made in her heart. She couldn't forget the signal, the way the boy's fingers moved, as if he was reaching through silence for someone who might see. And Max had seen. That mattered. That meant it was real. At school, she couldn't focus. Her thoughts circled like birds trapped in a room, restless and searching. Every moment she replayed the scene in her mind, the way Max stopped, the flash of the signal, the boy's eyes. It wasn't a dream. So she made a plan. Every afternoon after school, she would take Max back to Alder Park. Same time, same path. If there was any chance they might cross paths with the boy again, she had to take it. For 6 days straight, she walked the gravel trail under the yellowing trees. Max trotted quietly beside her, ears alert, nose twitching. But there was nothing. Families played near the swings, joggers passed with earbuds in, kids laughed on the jungle gym. No boy, no man, no signal. By the 7th day, Emily's hope had thinned like morning fog. Max didn't act strange anymore. He was calm, focused, but not like before. He hasn't been back, she whispered to herself, sitting on a park bench, staring at the spot where the boy had once passed. Max nudged her hand with his nose, gently. A small comfort. But Emily felt something heavier than comfort that day. Doubt. What if it had been nothing? What if she had misread everything? What if the signal wasn't real, or worse, if no one else would ever believe her? That night, she folded her notebook shut and told herself she had tried, that maybe it was over, that maybe the ghost of that moment had passed. But deep down, she knew. Ghosts don't just disappear, not if they're still waiting to be seen. It happened when Emily least expected it. A rainy Thursday afternoon, nothing special. She and Max had just stopped by Bright Mart, the local grocery store, to pick up peanut butter and apples for school lunch. The aisles were full of the usual chatter. Moms comparing prices, kids asking for candy, carts squeaking on linoleum floors. They were halfway down the snack aisle when Max stopped. Sudden, rigid, his body stiffened, ears snapped forward, nose high in the air. Emily blinked. Max? Then he growled, a low, steady warning from deep in his chest. Emily followed his gaze and froze. At the end of the aisle, walking calmly past the rows of cereal boxes, was the man. Same gray coat, same too-perfect posture. And walking beside him, holding a small shopping basket, was the boy. Emily's breath caught. The boy looked thinner, his clothes neat but oddly stiff, like they didn't belong to a child who played. And then he looked up. Their eyes met. For a split second, something flickered behind his expression. Recognition, desperation, hope. And again he raised 3 fingers behind his back. Emily's heart dropped into her stomach. Her hands went cold. Max barked, sharp, once. This time, there was no mistaking it. Not a coincidence, not confusion, not imagination. It was him. And he was still asking for help. Emily reached for the nearest adult. A store employee, a woman stacking soup cans. That man, that boy. He's in trouble. He's asking for help. The woman looked startled, confused. What? Honey, are you sure? But the man and boy were already turning the corner, out of sight. And Emily knew if she didn't do something now, no one would. Emily didn't hesitate. She ran down the aisle, Max right beside her, his nails tapping sharp against the floor. But by the time they rounded the corner, the man and the boy had vanished into the crowd. Her eyes scanned frantically. Nothing. She darted toward the front of the store, found another employee near the checkout lanes. Please, that man! He has a boy with him, and the boy just gave me a signal. He needs help. The woman stared. What kind of signal, sweetheart? Emily tried to show her. Like this, 3 fingers, behind his back. It means he's in trouble. But the woman's face softened into concern, not urgency. Maybe it was just a gesture. Are you sure? I'm sure, Emily whispered, her voice shaky. Please, just call someone. But no one called anyone. The manager came over, tall and distracted. He looked at Emily, then at Max. Is this your dog? She's with me, Emily said quickly. We're not causing trouble, but that boy is in danger. The manager exhaled, already tired. I can't accuse a customer based on a hand gesture, honey. There's no law against holding up fingers. Emily felt heat rise in her cheeks. Her chest tightened. No one was going to help. No one believed her. She looked down at Max. His ears were still forward, his stance tense. And then she made a choice. She slipped quietly out of the automatic doors, keeping her distance, eyes scanning the parking lot. Max led the way, nose to the ground, tail rigid. They spotted them near the far end. Man, boy, walking quickly. Emily followed. Not too close, not enough to be seen. She didn't know what she was going to do. She just knew that if Mac believed that boy, then she had to too. Emily moved fast but careful, ducking behind parked cars and shadowing from a distance. Max kept a steady pace, always a few feet ahead, checking every corner with silent urgency. They crossed the back of the parking lot, through a narrow alley behind the hardware store. The rain had picked up, light but steady. Emily's sneakers squeaked on the wet pavement, heart pounding with every step. Then, just as they reached the far edge of the block, they vanished again. Emily froze. She spun around, scanning the sidewalks, the shops, the parked cars. Nothing. Her throat tightened. No, no, no. Max sniffed the air, darted left, then right, then circled back. He paced, anxious, frustrated. "They're gone, Max," Emily whispered, defeated. But Max didn't give up. He sniffed the ground, ears twitching, following an invisible trail. Then he paused at a street corner, looked back at Emily, and ran. "Max," she called, torn between chasing and staying hidden. But in that second, something clicked. Emily remembered what her dad always said about Max. He doesn't just follow scent, he follows intention. So she trusted him. She knelt beside the nearest bus stop bench, heart racing, and whispered, "Track them. I'll wait here." Max disappeared into the streets. Emily waited. 2 hours. The sun had slipped behind the clouds. Her hands were cold, her legs stiff from sitting, but she didn't move. And then Max returned. Muzzle damp, fur bristling, tail rigid. He paced in tight circles, low growl in his throat. Not fear, warning. Emily stood up fast. She didn't need words. Max had found something real, and it was time to tell someone who'd finally listen. Emily didn't wait. As soon as Max returned, still bristling, eyes sharp, she grabbed his leash and ran home, soaked from rain and adrenaline. Her dad was just stepping out of the garage when he saw them. "Emily?" he said, startled. "What's going on?" Emily's words tumbled over themselves. She told him everything. The park, the boy, the signal, the second sighting at the grocery store, the hours of waiting. And now, Max's return with that same electric tension in his body. Her dad listened quietly, then knelt down, placing a steady hand on Max's back. Max didn't move, just stared ahead, alert. "I believe you," he said softly. "More importantly, I believe him." They didn't waste time. Her dad drove them to the Eden Valley Police Department, where the receptionist raised her eyebrows at the sight of a soaked girl, a retired military dog, and a worried father. But then something shifted. An older officer walked into the lobby. His badge read Lieutenant Carver, and the moment he saw Max, his face changed. "No way," he murmured. "That's Max, from Unit Bravo out of Kandahar?" Emily's dad nodded. Carver whistled low. "That dog saved 4 men from a collapsed building. I'd trust his instincts over half this department." Within 10 minutes, officers had gathered. Emily retold everything, her voice shaking but sure. Carver crouched beside Max. "Where'd you last track them, boy?" Max didn't bark. He just stood, tail low, and looked toward the door. It was all the answer they needed. They followed Max for nearly 20 minutes, past the edge of town, down narrow roads swallowed by trees, and into the forgotten outskirts, where the pavement cracked and the houses stood too far apart. Max led them to a chain-link fence covered in ivy. Beyond it stood an old warehouse, long abandoned by any official records, but humming faintly with noise. Barking, faint and constant. The officers exchanged looks. Lieutenant Carver gave a sharp nod. "We move in." What they found inside was worse than anything Emily could have imagined. Rows of cages, dogs with matted fur and haunted eyes, the air thick with bleach, ammonia, and something darker. Fear. It wasn't a kennel. It was a training ground. But not for good. These dogs were being beaten, starved, broken, to be used for illegal work. And in a corner, huddled behind a stack of plastic bins, was the boy. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. His eyes just locked onto Max and widened. Max moved first, slow, gentle, not barking, not charging, just walking toward him like an old friend. The boy reached out with shaking fingers and touched Max's fur. That was when the officers stepped in, surrounding the space, calling for medical support. Carver knelt beside the boy. "What's your name, son?" No answer, just a look, deep and knowing. Later, through the investigation, they would learn that he was Caleb, 10 years old, son of a former caretaker who had vanished under suspicious circumstances. Caleb had been mute since birth, but not deaf. He had seen everything. And every day, he watched those dogs suffer. Every day, he hoped someone would notice. And when he saw Max, he knew this one would listen. The warehouse didn't stay empty for long. Within weeks, the city council approved funding to transform the old compound into something new, the Harbor Glen Animal Recovery Center, a place not of training, but of healing, where the sound of barking no longer meant fear, but freedom. Fences were repaired, cages removed. In their place, soft bedding, open yards, gentle hands. Emily and Max visited often. Each time, Max walked slowly through the hallways, sniffing each kennel like a quiet guardian. The dogs responded differently to him. Some wagged. Some simply lay still, calm for the first time in weeks. But it was Caleb who changed the most. He lived temporarily with a foster family nearby, while therapists helped him adjust to the world beyond walls and chains. He still didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His smile did. One afternoon, as Emily and Max entered the main yard, they saw him. Caleb sat beneath a tree, a sketchbook in his lap. He didn't look up at first, but Max trotted over, tail swaying gently, and nudged Caleb's hand with his nose. Caleb looked up and smiled. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a drawing. It was simple, crayon on thin paper. A girl, a boy, and a German shepherd, all standing in front of a building with trees around it. At the top, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "The place where I was heard." That night, as the sun dipped below the rooftops of Harbor Glen, Emily sat with Max on their front porch. The street was quiet, the good kind of quiet. Not heavy, not scared, just still, peaceful. Max rested his head on Emily's lap, his ears twitching now and then, alert even in rest. She stroked his fur gently, watching the sky shift from amber to deep blue. "I used to think dogs just barked when they wanted something," Emily said softly. Max didn't move. "But now I know. Some dogs don't bark at all. They just listen, and that's enough." Her dad stepped out with 2 mugs, one for her, warm cocoa, and one with just warm water for Max. He sat beside them, not saying much, just being there. Down the street, the lights of the new recovery center glowed faintly through the trees. Somewhere inside, Caleb was probably drawing again. Maybe another picture, maybe another memory turning into peace. Emily glanced down at Max. "I think he chose you," she whispered. Her dad smiled. "Maybe, but I think he chose you first." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves. Somewhere, a dog barked, not in fear, but in play. Emily leaned back, her hand resting on Max's broad shoulder. "Thank you," she said, not to anyone in particular. Just, thank you. For listening, for believing, for staying. And Max, he didn't say a word, but somehow, she knew he heard it all. The snowstorm descended upon the small town like a beast unleashed, swallowing every street, every alley, every fragile sign of life beneath its suffocating weight. The wind howled, slamming against windows and doors, clawing at the edges of houses as if demanding to be let inside. Snow blanketed rooftops and sidewalks, turning the town into a frozen, silent wasteland. Through the blinding white, a dark figure moved, slow, deliberate, relentless. Rex, a retired German Shepherd canine, pushed forward, his paws sinking deep into the snow with each step. Ice clung to his thick coat, forming jagged patches along his legs and belly. Each breath hung in the air, a fleeting wisp before vanishing into the cold. Once, Rex had been the loyal partner of Officer Ryan Mitchell, standing side by side through countless missions. Now, Ryan was gone, lost after their patrol car skidded off the road during the storm. And Rex, though battered by exhaustion, followed the faintest trace of his scent, clinging to hope with every step. Instinct drove him homeward, but beneath the need to return was something deeper. A pull, an unshakable sense that somewhere out there, in the heart of the storm, there was someone else, someone small, someone fragile, waiting for Rex to find them. The storm raged on, whipping down narrow streets and sending spirals of snow dancing through the air. The howling wind masked almost every sound, but not to Rex. His ears twitched, catching something faint, the thin, tremulous sound of shallow breathing. Fragile, struggling, human. Rex turned down a narrow alley behind the old market square, paws sinking deep into snowdrifts that nearly swallowed his legs. His eyes narrowed as he spotted a small shape huddled beneath a sagging awning. Emma, no older than 10, sat curled into herself, her knees pulled tight to her chest, her thin jacket useless against the relentless cold. Rex froze. His sharp eyes traced every detail of her face, the tangle of dark hair plastered to her forehead, the gaunt curve of her cheeks, but most of all, her eyes. Wide, frightened, yet stubbornly defiant. Eyes so eerily familiar. They were nearly identical to Ryan's daughter, the little girl Rex had known from countless visits to the station, the one who always squealed his name and threw her arms around his neck. Something deep within Rex stirred. Something primal, something older than instinct itself. A pull, a recognition, a sense of purpose. Without a sound, Rex stepped closer. He didn't growl, didn't bark. He simply sat down beside Emma, his broad body shielding her from the wind. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his head onto her trembling knees, his breath warm against her frozen hands. Emma startled at first, but when she looked down, all she saw were gentle brown eyes gazing up at her. No threat, no demand, just presence, solid, protective, familiar in a way she couldn't explain. Her small hand reached out, fingers shaking, and brushed the cold, wet fur on Rex's head. Rex didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned into her touch, pressing his head against her palm, as if he had been waiting for this moment as long as she had. In the heart of the storm, two lost souls found each other. The wind screamed louder as night settled in, pulling icy tendrils through every crack and crevice of the decaying awning above. Rex never slept. His body lay still beside her, but his ears twitched at every shift, every gust of air, every fragile breath that escaped from the girl curled up beside him. Then, a sharp crack split the silence. Wood gave way with a splintering snap. Rex shot to his feet just as a heavy section of the awning collapsed, slamming down before he could move. The jagged edge struck Emma across the shoulder and the side of her head, sending her crumpling into the snow. Her small hand slipped from her lap, fingers splayed lifelessly against the frozen ground. Rex barked, loud, frantic, his voice cutting through the storm. He lunged toward her, nudging her limp shoulder with his nose, licking desperately at her pale cheek. She didn't stir. Her breathing was thin, shallow, her chest barely moving beneath her jacket. Blood welled from a gash just above her temple, stark and vivid against the snow. Panic twisted through Rex's chest. He whimpered low and urgent, pacing tight circles around her, pausing only to nudge her again, a silent plea for her to wake up, to respond, to prove she was still there. He raised his head, barking into the night, a sharp, commanding call for help that echoed unanswered through the empty streets. No one came. His body trembled, not from cold, but from the terrible helplessness tightening in his chest. Then, something shifted in his stance. Duty, instinct, purpose, the kind of clarity only a trained canine knew. Rex lowered his head one final time, pressing a soft, deliberate lick to Emma's cheek. A silent promise. "I'll come back." Then he turned and plunged into the storm. Rex tore through the storm, his breath coming in short bursts that curled into fragile wisps of vapor before disappearing into the night. Snow clung to his legs, freezing into jagged clumps with each pounding step, but the pain didn't matter. All he could see was Emma, crumpled in the snow, unmoving, her pale face seared into his mind. Far at the edge of town, a dim light glowed from the window of a small cabin, the only beacon in the sea of white. Inside, Ethan Carter sat slumped in a worn armchair, a half-empty glass of whiskey balanced precariously on the table beside him. The silence was his only companion, silence and the weight of memories he couldn't outrun. His wife, his son, the accident that took them both and left Ethan hollowed out, content to drift through life unseen. The sudden scratching at the door jolted him upright. Ethan frowned, setting his glass aside as he approached the door. When he opened it, there stood Rex, snow-caked, trembling slightly from the cold, but eyes sharp with purpose, wide, desperate. Ethan's hand twitched toward the doorframe, ready to close it, until he saw it, that look. The same raw, aching plea he had once seen in his own reflection. It wasn't just a dog begging for shelter. It was a soul asking for help. Rex barked sharply, turning to face the storm, then looking back at Ethan. No hesitation, no fear, just trust. Without a word, Ethan grabbed his coat and a flashlight. No questions asked, no explanations needed. One man, one dog, bound by unspoken understanding, and the quiet urgency of saving a life waiting somewhere in the dark. The wind shrieked through the empty streets as Ethan followed Rex, the beam of his flashlight slashing through the swirling snow. The cold cut into his face, but Ethan barely noticed. Something deeper than instinct, something far more urgent, was pulling him forward. Rex led the way without hesitation, pausing only long enough to make sure Ethan stayed close behind. His breath came in fast, white bursts, his paws punching through the snow with relentless purpose. His eyes, even in the dark, shone with unwavering resolve. Someone was waiting for him. Someone he would not fail. Then Ethan saw her. Emma lay crumpled in the snow, her small arms limp at her sides, fresh snow beginning to cover her delicate face. A thin line of dried blood ran from her temple, cutting through the perfect white like a scar. Rex was at her side in an instant, licking frantically at her cheek, her hand, her forehead. His muzzle nudged her shoulder, soft whines trembling in his throat. The helpless, broken sound of a protector unable to fix what was broken. Ethan dropped to his knees, fingers trembling as they pressed against the cold skin beneath her nose. A faint breath, fragile, but there. Without a word, Ethan gathered Emma into his arms, wrapping his coat tightly around her tiny frame. Her weight, far too light for a child her age, pressed against his chest, stirring something long buried inside him. Each step through the snow felt heavier, not from the storm, but from the weight of responsibility settling over him once more. Rex stayed so close, Ethan could feel his breath against his leg, the dog's silent vow mirroring the one Ethan couldn't yet put into words. Protecting her wasn't just a duty. Somehow it already felt like a second chance. The glass doors of the emergency room slid open, a rush of warm air spilling out into the freezing night. Rex barely noticed. His eyes never left Ethan, who carried Emma in his arms, her small body limp against his chest. Nurses and doctors converged, voices overlapping in a blur of urgency and concern. Rex followed, limping slightly, his paws leaving wet, crimson-tinged prints across the pristine tile floor. The cut on his leg went unnoticed, lost beneath the weight of far greater fears. Emma disappeared behind the heavy double doors of the emergency room, and in that instant, something inside Rex cracked wide open. He lunged forward, paws scraping against the slick glass, his nails screeching faintly as they searched for a hold. Again and again, he pawed at the door, his body trembling with frustration and fear. Each scrape, each whimper was a plea, not for himself, but for her. The doctors tried to guide him away, a gentle hand reaching down to coax him back. But when Rex turned to face them, they froze. His eyes, those deep brown eyes, once trained to search for danger, now filled with something raw and painfully human, begged them to understand. He took the sleeve of the nearest doctor's coat gently in his teeth, tugging not with force but with desperate tenderness. It wasn't aggression. It was a prayer. "Please, she's all I have." His body lowered slightly, his tail tucked tight beneath him, ears back, every fiber of him radiating helplessness and hope. A nurse standing nearby quietly raised her phone and began recording. The sight of a battle-hardened canine, scarred by storms both within and without, clinging to the doorway with the kind of desperate loyalty only a dog could know. It was the kind of moment that could crack even the coldest heart. The video would soon spread far beyond the hospital walls, but for Rex, none of that mattered. All he cared about was the girl behind the door and whether she would come back to him. Outside the emergency room, Rex sat motionless. His paws were no longer scratching at the door, but his body leaned heavily against the glass, his breath fogging up the lower corner. His eyes never left the frosted window, his ears twitching at every faint noise, desperate to catch even the smallest sound, a voice, a breath, anything that meant Emma was still there. Beside him, Ethan sat in silence, hands clasped tightly together between his knees. His gaze rested on the floor, but his mind wasn't there. He'd once convinced himself that attachments were too dangerous, that after losing everything, caring again only meant inviting more pain. But now, a little girl and a worn-out canine had cracked that wall wide open. Down the hall, the nurse's video had already been posted. No one expected it to spread the way it did. Within hours, the image of Rex, tugging softly at the doctor's sleeve, his eyes filled with raw, unfiltered desperation, had reached thousands. Comments poured in, along with messages from strangers. Is the girl okay? How can we help? The quiet indifference of the town had begun to fracture. The same doors that once stayed closed against the storm were starting to open, just a crack. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other in years were now sharing the video, asking how they could pitch in. But Rex knew none of this. All he knew was the closed door in front of him and the girl behind it. And so he waited, his world reduced to a single hope that Emma would come back. Time moved differently inside the hospital. Every tick of the clock stretched longer, the hurried footsteps of nurses blurring into white noise. But for Rex, sound meant nothing. His world had narrowed to this single door, and whatever lay beyond it. And then the door opened. A nurse stepped out first, followed closely by Ethan, his face drawn with exhaustion but softened with quiet relief. Behind them, on a small rolling bed, lay Emma. Her face was pale, framed by tangled hair, but her chest rose and fell in gentle, steady rhythm. Rex shot to his feet. There was no hesitation, no command needed. His paws skidded slightly on the polished floor as he bolted forward, his tail slicing through the air. His nose pressed into Emma's hand, a soft whimper escaping his throat, a quiet reassurance that he was still there. Emma stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, the harsh hospital light blurring into soft halos. Her fingers twitched beneath the thin blanket, and for a moment she seemed lost between sleep and waking. Then her gaze found him, a familiar shape, a wet nose pressing against her hand, and those eyes, full of desperate relief. "Rex?" she whispered, her voice thin but filled with something deeper. "Trust? Gratitude? Love?" Rex whimpered softly, pressing closer, his tail sweeping across the floor in wide, trembling arcs. Behind them, Ethan stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. For the first time in years, hope felt real. Fragile, but real. Further down the hall, a man stood in silence, Ryan Mitchell. He didn't need an introduction. The way Rex leaned into the girl's hand, the softness in his usually sharp eyes, told Ryan everything. His partner, the dog who had once stood beside him in danger, had found something even greater than duty. He had found someone to protect. Ryan Mitchell stood at the far end of the hallway, unmoving. The dog sitting at the edge of the hospital bed wasn't just his former partner. He was something more now. Rex, the canine who once followed Ryan into every danger without question, had found his own path, a path that led straight to Emma. Ryan walked forward slowly, but he didn't call out. He didn't need to. There was something in Rex's eyes that was different now. No longer the sharp, obedient focus of a working dog awaiting orders. This was softer, deeper. The eyes of a guardian who had chosen his own mission. Ethan rose quietly, stepping aside to let Ryan approach. The former officer knelt beside Rex, his calloused hand resting gently on the dog's head. "Good boy," Ryan murmured, his voice rough with emotion. Rex turned, ears twitching as recognition flickered in his eyes. His tail wagged briefly, thumping softly against the side of the hospital bed. But within seconds, his gaze returned to Emma, as though afraid she might disappear if he looked away too long. Ryan saw it. He saw it all, and instead of sadness, there was pride in his smile. "You found someone worth protecting, huh?" In the weeks that followed, Ethan completed the paperwork to officially adopt Emma. For the first time in years, his house was no longer a place of silence. There were soft footsteps in the hall, bursts of laughter echoing through the kitchen, and the faint scent of something sweet baking in the oven. Ryan brought Rex home, but he never stood between him and the girl who had stolen his heart. Every weekend, Ryan drove Rex back to visit Emma, and every time the door swung open, Rex barreled inside, tail wagging furiously, his joyful barks filling the air. Rex, the dog who had once belonged to a single partner, now had two families, one in uniform and one in a little girl's heart. Winter slowly gave way to spring, the snow melting into shimmering puddles that reflected a soft, pale sky. In the small house at the edge of town, laughter spilled out onto the porch, light and free. Emma sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, her tiny hands clutching a worn-out toy, waving it teasingly above Rex's head. His ears perked, tail wagging wildly, and with a playful leap, he snatched it from her grip. The sound of her giggles mingled with his happy barks, filling the quiet house with life. Just a few steps away, Ethan stood with a cup of coffee, steam curling up into the cool air. His face, once hardened by years of silence and grief, had softened. In his eyes, there was something new. Hope. In a few days, Ryan would bring Rex back again, and just like always, Emma would be waiting by the door, her small hand waving eagerly as Rex bounded up the steps, as excited to see her as she was to see him. Rex was no longer just a retired canine. He was a bridge between past and present, between loss and healing. A quiet reminder that even the deepest wounds could mend, one open heart at a time.